진행하겠습니다. 실례지만 같은 일이시죠? 같은 팀에 다 가셨어요. 난 지금 스테이션이 지금 잠깐 20분이 쉴 수 있죠. 퇴근하시고요. 코스
Welcome everybody. Welcome to our workshop, Addressing the Global Amphibian Crisis by Integrating Policy, Planning, and Research. This workshop is currently proposed and being my name is Bruce Waldman. I'm a professor at Seoul National University. I'm just the contact person for the workshop. It's actually organized jointly by the Amphibian Survival Alliance, the Korean Amphibian Specialist Group of the IUCN Species Survival Commission, and the Korean Research Society of Herpetologists. So it involves both a global component and a Korean component. And there'll be several speakers. We're going to be focusing mostly on Asia, but in the context internationally of this crisis that we have with respect to amphibian decline. When we think of amphibian decline, I'll just give a very brief introduction. When we think of amphibian decline, we're most disturbed by, and many of you have heard of this, the example of what happened in the Monteverde cloud forest in Costa Rica in the late 1980s, where this toad, which lived underground most of the year, had just been discovered and started to be studied in the 70s and 80s, and finally in the 1980s people were getting around to studying it. And they live underground, or they lived underground most of the year. And then in 1987, the population was reasonably healthy, and people were studying them, who were finally starting to understand them. There may have been 1,000 toads on one night, and then they disappear. In 1998, there were just tens of toads. In 1989, there was one male toad. Since 1989, no more golden toads have been seen, and the species is now presumed extinct. What's troubling about this example is that we don't have any understanding of what happened, or because this is a pristine habitat. When we go to IUCN, we hear about habitat destruction and other pollution, other known causes. If you've been in Costa Rica, it's a wonderful nature preserve. The government has been very active for a long time preserving the habitat. The habitat is preserved. We have not a clue why the toads disappeared, and it takes a while even to know whether they did disappear. So in this workshop, in order to have success, we have to coordinate scientists, NGOs, government officials, the public. We have to engage the private sector. We have to engage all sectors to combat this crisis. And it doesn't just affect amphibians. It affects all species. So I'm just going to start off some examples, and also, of course, welcome you to Korea. At the same time that the golden toad disappeared from Monteverde rainforest, a whole host of other frogs, about half the species living in that pristine rainforest disappeared, including the harlequin frog, some species of the harlequin frog, some of which you see here on the cover of Newsweek magazine. So welcome to Korea. Some of you have asked, is it safe to be here? Well, no, we do have some problems. We're at war with North Korea. But Newsweek magazine actually has it right here, the crisis. Amphibian decline is actually a much more important global crisis than, oh, by the way, there's a nuclear example in North Korea. I think this is pretty accurate. Now, in Korea, I want to go over some examples, just very briefly, of amphibian research, amphibian protection. We study, as I mentioned, one of the species we study is the Asiatic toad, which has a large distribution. And here you see it in this looks like a beautiful, pristine population. Wonderful place to study. This is a typical sort of breeding habitat for toads in Korea. This is the same habitat. Okay? So what we have a juxtaposition of development of lots of buildings and habitats together. The toads seem to be doing fine here. Now, we want to talk first about some of the NGOs, the non-government groups, the people, the grassroots organizations, which are really deeply concerned about saving amphibians. And all over the world, we have to, this is the fuel, this is the seed of how we're going to save amphibians and how we're going to save any taxa. The people have to care. And there's a group called Toad Friends, among many other groups in Korea and around the world who are really very dedicated. So, they actually were concerned in 2003, 2004 that one of the habitats of these Asiatic toads breed in Munhuni was going to be developed into office buildings and apartment buildings and government buildings like you just saw. So they staged some protests. Here on the left, you see the population, the habitat in 2003, and here you see it 5 years later. So the buildings would come up. But this NGO, this group of very dedicated grassroots lovers of frogs and toads were able to save the key habitat of the toads to breed. And you can actually, it's actually better than it looks here. This is a drawing of the toad breeding habitat, which is right in the middle of this village, surrounded by buildings. The toads have been saved. We've tried to get the NGOs involved in this workshop, but some of them feel that there are bigger issues. But I wanted to say that it's really important to get grassroots organizations involved. And they're more involved in that. They didn't stop there. They're tracking the toads. They're seeing how many come back every year. They're weighing them. And they're making the public continually aware, having annual concerts, museums. This is the fuel that we need to save amphibian populations and other species as well. So that's an example of how, and it's just one of many examples of how in Korea people, scientists are involved in saving amphibians. Korea does use best practice policy, I think, when we have endangered species, and this Asiatic toad is not endangered, it's quite common. But when we have endangered species, we protect key habitat. We definitely use translocations, move frogs to less threatened areas. I want to go now to New Zealand and talk about how scientists and government can work together or not. The Archie frog is the #1 age species, evolutionarily distinctive and globally endangered. It's thought that the frog is threatened by a virulent fungal disease called chytriomycosis that you're going to hear a lot about during this workshop. And the government is taking actions, and they think that they have done all the actions they need to save the frog, but actually the frog isn't doing so well. Just quickly, a scientist found in 1999, chytrid fungus that had been spreading around the world. It had already been in Australia, decimating populations, Central America, and just within a year after that became public, the disease was found in this pond in New Zealand. And it was carried by this introduced Australian frog, golden bell frog, it's called, or got different names in Australia and New Zealand, but it certainly shows disease, epizootics, in other words, epidemics, and the frogs died. And the real worry was that this disease would spread to these frogs, these Archie native frogs, which are like living fossils. They look like frogs lived 150, 200 million years ago. They have all sorts of, they're like living dinosaurs. They were around before the dinosaurs, and they survived ice ages, and they survived millennia. Yet now the populations in areas like this are declining. Was chytrid fungus going to wipe out this frog that had been around so long? The populations are radically declining. They started declining about the same time chytrid fungus was found. And often when one goes looking for the frogs, instead of finding those cute blind frogs, this is what you find. And as a person who studies frogs, to find a dead decaying frog is really traumatic because you don't see this very often. The frogs disappear very quickly. So the scientist who was doing this work and was worried about chytrid fungus and was getting the people, the government, the NGOs concerned that chytrid fungus might kill the frogs, well, he brought some of these frogs back to the lab, had a captive colony, cured the frogs of disease. Well, they didn't have the disease that we thought. They did not have chytrid fungus. They had other diseases. The frogs, many of them recovered. They bred in captivity. And, well, it was actually, a scientist came up with a hypothesis that chytrid fungus might kill the frogs. It turned out to be incorrect. And he told the government, chytrid fungus can kill some frogs, but the question is, killing native frogs in New Zealand? And we don't think so. But the government, the Department of Conservation, really didn't believe it, and they decided they get other people to do the test. And it's still the standard theory of the Department of Conservation and belief that they're being killed by chytrid fungus. The frog colony that was successfully reproducing the frogs disappeared, was moved to Auckland Zoo, and they have not reproduced since. And that's over 10 years ago. This is a case where government and scientists did not work together productively. The frogs are the losers. We all have to work together. I'm just going to give you one last example. This is a student, Tyrone Hayes, who, for his undergraduate research, started studying the development of sex in tadpoles. Actually, I was a supervisor. I was much younger. Tadpoles don't develop a sex until right at metamorphosis. That was his undergraduate honors project. He's subsequently become reasonably well known because he's been studying a chemical called Amphibian that feminizes male frogs. Basically, when he studies the development of sexual organs in these tadpoles about the time of metamorphosis, he finds that these tadpoles that are turning into little frogs have both testes and ovaries. This is really worrisome, both testes and ovaries. So they're basically living hermaphrodite frogs. And using the South African frog as an example, well, here you see a happily mating pair of frogs. Except there's a genetic marker we have to tell males and females. We have a homosexual pair here. This frog is male,